This is 5-year-old Liam Conejo Romas being taken by ICE agents in his family's driveway after getting home from preschool on Tuesday.
Are they not supposed to arrest an illegal alien in the United States?
Judge has ordered the release of a 5-year-old boy and his dad who were detained by federal agents in Minnesota.
And then when they went to arrest his illegal alien father, the father ran. So the story is that ICE detained a 5-year-old. Well, what are they supposed to do?
Minnesota police stepping in to undo an ICE detention tells you everything about how far this situation spiraled. Federal agents moved into a quiet neighborhood and detained a 5-year-old boy along with his father, treating a family driveway like a high-risk operation. The child had just returned from school carrying a Spider-Man backpack, and both were sent hundreds of miles away to Texas. Authorities called it routine enforcement, while local police were left dealing with the damage it caused.
And mom was there. She saw out the window and dad was yelling, "Please do not open the door, don't open the door."
Let's break it down. Federal agents in Operation Metro Surge, dressed in tactical gear, decided that the biggest threat in Columbia Heights was this little boy and his father. School officials say agents even allegedly used the child as bait by having him knocked on his own front door to lure someone out. Meanwhile, ICE claims, basically, that the dad ran off and left his kid behind. Are we really expected to believe that?
Here's what the Department of Homeland Security is saying, that they were targeting the boy's father, who is from Ecuador, but when ICE agents approached them in the driveway, DHS says the dad took off and, quote, fled on foot, abandoning his child.
Neighbors and school leaders didn't buy the federal spin. They saw adults who could have taken custody of the child. They saw a freaking preschooler with a bunny hat and superhero backpack surrounded by armed officers. That image tore through the internet because it makes you ask, why are we treating a child like a tactical target? What was ICE thinking here?
Where's your humanity? Where's your humanity? That's a kid! That is a child!
Not to mention, this was not some random family. The dad and son both had an active asylum claim in process. They weren't fugitives with felony warrants. They followed immigration law as best as the system lets them, and yet federal agents decided to haul them off anyway. Why does this seem like punishment instead of enforcement?
The school district released a video of that moment showing the chaotic scene that many people in Minneapolis say has become all too familiar since those 3,000 federal immigration agents have arrived in their city.
Now you have to appreciate the optics. While ICE doubled down and took them to Texas, folks erupted in outrage. City officials, school boards, activists wailed that this was an overreach and traumatizing kids. Even a federal judge blasted the government's approach as wildly out of line and ordered the pair released. Yes, a judge literally pointed to a viral photo of the child to make his legal argument. Why did it take a courtroom to say this was wrong?
Now, attorneys for the family are arguing tonight that they have an active case, an active asylum case, and therefore they are in the country legally. They also say the dad here has no criminal record.
And here's where things get interesting. While federal agents were patting themselves on the back for this display of enforcement muscle, local Minnesota police were doing exactly what law enforcement is supposed to do, thinking about public safety and not turning kids into headlines. Minneapolis area cops didn't turn this into some dramatic federal show. They responded to communities shaken by the ICE chaos. Isn't protecting communities supposed to be the priority?
Year-old Minneapolis boy and his father are back home in Minnesota as after this weekend, after being detained by ICE agents and sent to a detention center in Texas.
Minnesota police didn't make national news by creating crisis. They showed up to manage the fallout. They answered concerns from parents afraid to send their kids to school. They worked with local leaders pushing for calm as thousands expressed fear and anger. That's the job. The ones walking into schools, neighborhoods, and homes, not dragging toddlers off to family detention. ICE, have you checked with local cops on how this looks?
And what we do know also from school district officials, as we're still trying to learn more about this, is that Liam is one of 4 of their students who have been detained by ICE in the last few weeks. The school board chair who witnessed Liam's detention today rejected.
Here's something wild. The Columbia Heights School District had to cancel classes because of bomb threats after the dad and son's return. Meanwhile, teachers and administrators were trying to keep kids safe, even offering volunteers to patrol school grounds during drop-off. Local law enforcement wasn't flexing force, they were flexing community care. Isn't that what real public safety looks like?
5-year-old Liam Ramos and his father, who were detained by immigration officers in Minnesota and held at an ICE facility in Texas, are back in Minneapolis this weekend, released after a judge's order.
Now let's roast it together. ICE shows up with a huge deployment of officers, claims they're going after serious threats, then ends up making a 5-year-old headline. Local police show up to actually keep the peace while parents and children live in fear of federal raids. Shouldn't someone in the federal hierarchy explain the logic here?
President Trump said this weekend he is now advising Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem not to intervene in protests occurring in cities led by Democrats unless local authorities ask for federal help.
And I have to ask this. When federal authorities say they protected the child from the cold, or that they always tried to find an adult to take custody, the people on the ground are saying something totally different. School officials themselves dispute the version ICE gave. You have two narratives, a bureaucratic talking point and the lived experience of the community who saw this scene unfold. Who are we supposed to trust?
Democratic Representative Joaquin Castro accompanied father and son back to Minnesota and released these images.
What compounds this even more is that while federal agents were busy making this poor kid an involuntary poster child for enforcement, Minnesota cops were dealing with real public safety issues. Parents afraid to come to school, absentee rates surging because families are too scared to leave home, communities in panic. Doesn't that tell you something about priorities?
Liam's release comes amid a weekend of anti-ICE demonstrations throughout the nation, including in Los Angeles and Boston. Liam's release also comes as Democratic lawmakers continue to push for ICE reforms in Washington.
And most hilariously tragic of all, after all that uproar, Minnesota police were basically left in the position of doing the real work federal agents talked about doing. They were the de-escalators while ICE was the escalator. They were calming people while ICE stirred panic. They were listening to community needs while ICE made headlines for questionable tactics. Doesn't that make you ask who should really be running these operations?
We're going to continue to try to work with the local law enforcement and the leadership in Minnesota to do that, to make that community safer.
By the time ICE tried to explain itself, the story was already collapsing. DHS put out statements saying officers followed protocol, that they tried to hand the child to the mother, that everything was done by the book. Meanwhile, eyewitnesses said adults were right there offering to take the child. School officials backed that up publicly. So now we have two versions of reality floating around. Why does the official version keep cracking under basic scrutiny?
On Sunday's Face the Nation, Republican Representative Michael McCall acknowledged ICE operations in Minneapolis under Border Patrol's Gregory Bovino went too far.
Then you have the video and photos. Not edited montages, not activist spin, just raw footage of a frightened kid surrounded by armed federal agents. That image did more damage than 1,000 press releases ever could. When people saw it, they did not see enforcement. They saw intimidation. They saw power being flexed on the smallest possible target. How did ICE think this would land with the public? ICE keeps insisting this was about law and order, yet the community reaction says otherwise. Churches rang bells in protest. Parents kept their kids home from school. Teachers stood outside schools as human shields. Businesses became sit-in protest sites. That is not what stability looks like. That is what happens when trust collapses. Isn't maintaining public trust part of law enforcement's job?
President Trump said this weekend he is now advising Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem not to intervene in protests occurring in cities led by Democrats unless local authorities ask for federal help.
Now compare that with how Minnesota police handled the aftermath. No armored convoys, no threats, no social media taunts. They worked with school districts, coordinated with city leaders, and focused on calming a shaken community. That contrast is glaring. One side inflamed fear, the other tried to put out fires. Why is the federal response always louder while the local response is smarter? Even after the release, ICE did not pause. They did not apologize. They did not signal reform. They defended the operation and shifted blame. That response tells you everything. When agencies cannot admit mistakes, they repeat them. And Minnesota communities are already bracing for the next incident. How many families have to be rattled before someone pulls the brakes? Meanwhile, Minnesota police continued doing the work ICE claims to care about, keeping streets calm, protecting schools, responding to bomb threats triggered by the chaos ICE created. Think about that irony. Federal agents create panic. Local police absorb the fallout. Why are locals left to fix federal damage?
Trump's border czar Tom Homan has suggested the administration could reduce the number of immigration enforcement officers in Minnesota, but only if the state and local officials cooperate.
This is where credibility really breaks. ICE wants the public to trust its judgment, while simultaneously dismissing eyewitnesses, educators, parents, and judges. Trust does not work that way. It is built through restraint, not force. It is earned through transparency, not spin. Why does ICE act shocked when trust evaporates? Then there is the political layer. Federal officials talk tough on television, while local officials deal with real consequences on the ground. Kids missing school. Families are afraid to answer doors. Communities on edge. The people giving interviews are insulated from the harm. The people doing cleanup are not. Who is actually accountable here? Minnesota police earned respect by showing restraint in a moment that could have spiraled. They did not posture. They did not escalate. They did not turn fear into a press strategy. They acted like professionals who understand the communities they serve. That difference matters. Why does ICE struggle so badly with basic restraint?